killed Tupac and Biggie. I think both of these dudes were assassinated in some kind of way. More Biggie than Tupac. I think Tupac might got killed by a dude that they had an incident with earlier that day. But Biggie's seems a little
JFK.
Governmental to me.
Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell for more videos.
Then came the moment that changed everything. A moment that would echo through hip-hop history and alter the trajectory of multiple lives. As this story will show again and again, when pressure mounted, Puffy allegedly didn't resolve conflicts with conversation or compromise, he turned to intimidation and violence. Whether directly or through intermediaries, this pattern would become impossible to ignore. On the night of November 30th, 1994, Tupac Shakur arrived at Quad Recording Studios in Manhattan for a late-night session. He believed he was walking into a routine studio visit, one where he would meet up with Biggie and others in the East Coast Circle. Instead, what awaited him in the lobby was an ambush. Tupac was robbed and shot multiple times, struck in the body, and left bleeding on the floor. Authorities immediately framed the incident as a simple robbery gone wrong. But from the very beginning, the official explanation didn't add up. Despite the violent attack, none of Tupac's jewelry, cash, or valuables were taken. That detail alone raised serious doubts about the robbery narrative. For Tupac, the conclusion was immediate and personal. This was not random, and it was not about money. In later interviews, Tupac openly stated that he believed Diddy was behind the shooting. He felt set up, lured into the building under false pretenses, and deliberately placed in harm's way. From Tupac's perspective, the timing was too convenient, the location too specific, and the circumstances too controlled to be coincidence. Quad Studios wasn't just any place, it was territory closely associated with Bad Boy. What made the betrayal cut even deeper was the presence of Biggie in the building that night. Tupac had trusted him. He had considered him a friend. Yet in Pac's mind, silence was as damning as action. Even if Biggie hadn't pulled the trigger, Tupac believed he knew more than he was letting on. And that realization shattered whatever trust still existed between them.
All these years later, the former gang leader is behind bars in Las Vegas and is insisting the case be thrown out. And he is implicating another music legend who's making headlines, Sean "Diddy" Combs. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law and Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. Dwayne "Keefy D" Davis is said to be behind one of the most infamous killings in history. Tupac Shakur, the 90s rap superstar, was gunned down while riding in a car with Suge Knight after the Mike Tyson fight at the MGM Grand. And over the years, there have been multiple investigations into Tupac Shakur's murder, but there has been one man who has seemed to implicate himself in the assassination again and again and again. Dwayne Davis.
50 Cent has once again stirred conversation by pointing toward what he believes are long-ignored clues surrounding the murders of Tupac Shakur and the notorious B.I.G. According to 50 Cent, when all the fragments of evidence, interviews, and historical moments are placed side by side, the story becomes far more complex than the simplified narrative the public has been fed for decades. In his view, responsibility does not rest on one individual alone, and the truth may involve a wider network of influence, fear, and silence within the music industry. Recently resurfaced video footage from nearly 30 years ago has reignited interest in Tupac's shooting at Quad Recording Studios in New York. These visuals, showing the immediate aftermath and chaos surrounding the attack, have become a focal point for renewed analysis. Supporters of 50 Cent's argument claim that when this footage is examined alongside past interviews and testimonies, inconsistencies begin to emerge, details that were either overlooked or dismissed at the time. Every frame, every pause, and every reaction is now being scrutinized with modern eyes. This renewed discussion does not stop with Tupac's survival of the Quad Studios shooting. Instead, it stretches forward through a chain of events that many believe ultimately culminated in the deaths of both Tupac and Biggie. 50 Cent suggests that the industry has long known more than it publicly admits, choosing silence over accountability. According to this perspective, the murders were not isolated incidents but part of a larger pattern involving power struggles, financial interests, and personal rivalries at the highest levels of hip-hop. In this breakdown, the focus is not only on who pulled the trigger, but on who may have benefited from the violence, who allegedly encouraged certain tensions, and who remained quiet when the stakes became deadly. Interviews from artists, producers, and associates, some recorded years ago, are now being reinterpreted in light of new claims. Statements that once sounded vague or evasive are now seen by some as deliberate attempts to avoid direct implication. This video sets out to methodically examine every clue that 50 Cent has recently highlighted: archival footage, sworn statements, industry relationships, and the timeline leading up to Biggie's death. Rather than presenting a definitive conclusion, the aim is to lay out the evidence as it exists and allow viewers to see the broader picture for themselves. When these elements are connected, the story begins to look less like a tragic coincidence and more like a deeply rooted mystery that has never truly been resolved.
But Kirk Burrows, I want to go back to this interview that he did with Rolling Stone. He said that Diddy, he was jealous of the relationship between Tupac and Big. And he also went on to say that Diddy, he wanted to be friends with Tupac, but Tupac wasn't interested. Diddy and Tupac was friends at first, bro. I remember the time me and Diddy rolled up to Pac in, I think it's what's the name of that club? The Roxy. There was some kind of concert going on, and they was talking and everything. They had a friendship. I don't know why their friendship fell out. Their friendship was before before Biggie and Pop. So I don't know why they fell out. I know every girl that Tupac had, Puff wanted and got. So did he have jealousy? Yeah, he had a jealousy of Pac. But I think that it was more so that he knew Big was the meal ticket and that Pac wanted Big to be with him with Thug Life, but he didn't have the money at the time. And when Big got the money from Puff, Pac gave him the blessings to go with him, but he also told Big that he had to watch Puff because Puff was going to rob him blind.
To understand how everything spiraled out of control, you have to go back to the early 1990s, a time when hip-hop was exploding into a cultural force larger than anyone had imagined. On the West Coast, names like Dr. Dre, Snoop Dogg, and Tupac Shakur were reshaping the sound of rap, turning it into something raw, political, and unapologetically real. Meanwhile, on the East Coast, a different empire was being built, one led by Sean Puffy Combs and powered by the rise of Christopher Wallace, better known as the Notorious B.I.G. These were not just artists, they were brands, movements, and symbols of regional pride. The industry was divided not only by geography, but by philosophy. The West Coast leaned into authenticity and street credibility, while the East Coast, under Puffy's guidance, blended gritty storytelling with commercial appeal. At the center of all this stood Tupac, who quickly established himself as more than just a rapper. He was outspoken, politically charged, and increasingly seen as a leader within the culture. Everything shifted when Biggie released Ready to Die. The album was an instant classic and positioned Biggie as a generational talent. Tupac, rather than feeling threatened, reportedly respected Biggie's skill and gravitated toward him. The two spent time together, building a genuine bond that went beyond industry networking. But this relationship created tension behind the scenes, especially for Puffy. According to those close to the situation, Puffy saw Tupac as a direct threat to Bad Boy Entertainment's dominance. The fear wasn't just artistic competition, it was about control. If Biggie ever chose loyalty to Tupac over Bad Boy, Puffy's entire empire could collapse. Death Row Records, led by Suge Knight, was already a powerhouse, and adding Biggie to that roster would have been devastating for Bad Boy's future. Puffy allegedly attempted to keep Tupac close, trying to influence him and maintain leverage over Biggie. But insiders often describe Tupac as someone who could sense authenticity immediately. Real recognizes real, as the saying goes, and many within the industry felt Puffy's motivations were driven more by fear and ambition than genuine friendship. This perception didn't help Puffy's standing, as he was never widely embraced by artists outside his inner circles. Back to the unresolved questions surrounding Tupac and Biggie, many observers believe that controlling the narrative has become just as important as addressing the allegations themselves. In moments like this, public figures often turn to media projects, documentaries, interviews, and carefully curated stories to reshape how they are seen. According to critics, this is exactly what appears to be happening now. Reports have surfaced claiming that Diddy's sons are working on a documentary centered around their father's life, legacy, and influence. On the surface, it's presented as a tribute, an attempt to humanize him and tell his side of the story. But to skeptics, the timing raises serious questions. Why release a personal documentary, just as old allegations are resurfacing and investigators are reportedly re-examining long-dormant leads. Media analysts point out that documentaries are powerful tools. They don't need to prove innocence or guilt, they simply need to guide emotions. By focusing on family, success, and hardship, they can subtly redirect attention away from uncomfortable topics. For many viewers, perception becomes reality. If the story feels sincere enough, doubts soften and skepticism fades.
My favorite thing about 50 Cent's Netflix Diddy documentary is how he built a timeline off of this information. And one of my favorite parts of this documentary is them really getting into the timeline of events when it comes to Tupac and Biggie. And it really gives us a lot of perspective from people that were close to the situation, and a lot of people allege in this documentary that they believe that Diddy was very jealous of Tupac. And they pretty much go through everything from the quad incident and Tupac believing that Puffy was behind it, like he said in the Vibe interview, and they lay out this whole timeline of the downfall happening perfectly, in my opinion. We are even hearing from Greg Kading, the detective that worked on Tupac and Biggie's case in this documentary. He is the investigator that did that proper agreement with Keefy D way back in 2008, where Keefy D alleged that Diddy tried to offer him $1 million to take out Tupac and Suge Knight. And Tupac's trial with Keefy D is coming up very soon in early 2026, and we know that Diddy's name has been dropped at least 200 times during these proceedings already. So this is one case that I am definitely waiting for and I am going to cover. In Keefy D's 2008 proper agreement, he alleged that Diddy's friend Zip Martin is the one that gave him the weapon that was used to take out Tupac. Keefy D told the investigator Greg Kading that Zip Martin had a special compartment to keep this weapon in his car that he drove to Las Vegas. And in this documentary, we have Greg Kading confirming that Zip Martin did drive the same type of vehicle that Keefy D alleged to Las Vegas this night. And then during this documentary, we heard from the former president of Bad Boy, Kirk Burroughs, who alleged during this time, Diddy had him hiring a whole bunch of people and getting cars to drive to Las Vegas. And he is now very curious into why Diddy wanted to do this. And he said in his opinion, he now believes that Diddy was behind taking out
What many people consider the most unsettling piece of this entire puzzle didn't surface until years later. Nearly 2 decades after Tupac Shakur's death, a new voice emerged, one that came directly from within his family. Tupac's brother, Mopreme Shakur, publicly revealed information that reignited long-dormant suspicions surrounding the case and shifted attention back toward figures who had long denied involvement. According to Mopreme, Sean Diddy Combs had reached out to him after Tupac's murder. This alleged contact immediately raised eyebrows. For years, Diddy had consistently denied any role in the events leading up to Tupac's shooting and had publicly distanced himself from the situation entirely. Yet Mopreme's claims suggested that Diddy was more aware of the circumstances than he had ever admitted. Mopreme did not claim to possess direct evidence proving Diddy ordered or orchestrated the killing. Instead, he emphasized that the outreach itself was strange, unexpected, and deeply troubling given the long-standing tension between Tupac and the Bad Boy camp. In Mopreme's view, the contact felt less like sympathy and more like an attempt to manage narratives or quietly contain fallout. Diddy, for his part, has always denied wrongdoing. Over the years, he has repeatedly stated that he had nothing to do with Tupac's murder and that the violence of the 1990s hip-hop era was driven by broader street conflicts, not executive decisions. Whenever the subject arises, his public response has remained consistent: denial, deflection, and distance. Still, Mopreme's comments added weight to a growing belief among fans and independent investigators that powerful industry figures may have had more influence over events than official stories suggest. For many, this wasn't about one phone call, it was about patterns. Patterns of silence, patterns of proximity, patterns of people knowing more than they were willing to say publicly. What makes Mopreme's claims particularly impactful is the timing. He waited nearly 20 years before speaking out. By then, much of the original fear surrounding the case had faded, and many of the key figures involved were either entrenched in power or already gone. To supporters of Mopreme's account, that delay added credibility. They argue that someone with nothing to gain and everything to lose wouldn't speak, unless they believed the truth still mattered. This revelation also reopened emotional wounds for Tupac's family. For them, the case was never just a mystery, it was a loss that never received closure. Every new detail, every resurfaced allegation, only reinforced the sense that justice had been delayed, if not denied entirely. As a result, interest in reopening the case intensified. Old interviews were re-examined. Long-dismissed statements were revisited. And the idea that Tupac's murder was not a random act of street violence, but part of a larger, more calculated sequence of events, gained new momentum. Whether Moprim's claims will ever lead to definitive answers remains uncertain. But what is clear is this. Decades later, the questions surrounding Tupac's death refuse to fade, and each new revelation makes the official story feel less complete.
This documentary that claimed, which we know wasn't true.
Yeah, check this out. We don't talk about things that are nonsense. We don't even entertain nonsense, my brother. So we're not even going to go there, with all due respect, but I appreciate you as a journalist asking. Thank you.
Because listen, 7 years ago, I'd have been like, yo, did you hire somebody to kill Pac? But no, you do it like a journalist.
Yeah, no, I mean, we wouldn't even get into nonsense like that. You know what I'm saying? It's nonsense.
Which we never believed, by the way.
Yeah.
Diddy has always publicly denied having any involvement in the Quad Studios shooting. From the moment Tupac was attacked, Puffy maintained that he had nothing to do with what happened that night. In interviews, statements, and through associates, he consistently pushed the narrative that the incident was an unfortunate but unrelated act of street violence. On paper, his denial appeared firm and unwavering. But for Tupac, the truth felt painfully obvious. From Pac's point of view, this wasn't just about who pulled the trigger, it was about who knew, who stayed silent, and who benefited. Tupac believed that he had been deliberately brought to Quad Studios under the impression that it was safe. He expected to see Biggie. He expected a normal studio session. Instead, he walked into an ambush. In his mind, that meant Biggie and Diddy were equally responsible, whether directly or indirectly. Pac didn't believe in coincidences. The fact that the shooting happened in a bad boy connected space, on a night when Biggie was present, was enough for him to connect the dots. Even if Biggie wasn't involved in planning the attack, Tupac felt that Biggie's failure to warn him, or to speak openly afterward, was a betrayal just as serious. This is where the East Coast versus West Coast divide truly ignited. Before Quad Studios, regional rivalry in hip-hop was mostly competitive about sound, style, and pride. After Quad, it became personal, emotional, and deeply hostile. Tupac no longer viewed the situation as industry rivalry, he saw it as survival. From his perspective, the people he once trusted were now threats. What followed was a shift in Pac's tone, energy, and message. His lyrics became sharper, more direct, and more accusatory. He stopped speaking in metaphors and started naming names. The tension between camps escalated rapidly, fueled by media coverage, radio personalities, and record labels that quietly benefited from the chaos. Diddy, meanwhile, continued to distance himself from the violence. Publicly, he portrayed himself as focused on business and music. Privately, critics argue that his silence spoke volumes. To Tupac, that silence confirmed everything he suspected. Every denial only reinforced Pac's belief that powerful figures could hide behind influence and money. As the months passed, the conflict took on a life of its own. Artists were forced to pick sides. Interviews turned hostile. Diss tracks became weapons. The rivalry was no longer contained within music. It spilled into real-world consequences. Looking back now, many observers see Quad Studios as the point of no return. The night when trust collapsed, paranoia took over, and the industry failed to step in before things spiraled out of control. What started as suspicion evolved into open warfare, and the cost would ultimately be devastating. This wasn't just a feud anymore. It was a chain reaction, one that would eventually claim both Tupac and Biggie's lives.
Oh wait, maybe I said that shit about boyfriend because he got Tupac killed.
Diddy has always publicly denied having any involvement in the Quad Studios shooting. From the moment Tupac was attacked, Puffy maintained that he had nothing to do with what happened that night. In interviews, statements, and through associates, he consistently pushed the narrative that the incident was an unfortunate but unrelated act of street violence. On paper, his denial appeared firm and unwavering. But for Tupac, the truth felt painfully obvious. From Pac's point of view, this wasn't just about who pulled the trigger, it was about who knew, who stayed silent, and who benefited. Tupac believed that he had been deliberately brought to Quad Studios under the impression that it was safe. He expected to see Biggie. He expected a normal studio session. Instead, he walked into an ambush. In his mind, that meant Biggie and Diddy were equally responsible, whether directly or indirectly. Pac didn't believe in coincidences. The fact that the shooting happened in a bad boy connected space, on a night when Biggie was present, was enough for him to connect the dots. Even if Biggie wasn't involved in planning the attack, Tupac felt that Biggie's failure to warn him, or to speak openly afterward, was a betrayal just as serious. This is where the East Coast versus West Coast divide truly ignited. Before Quad Studios, regional rivalry in hip-hop was mostly competitive about sound, style, and pride. After Quad, it became personal, emotional, and deeply hostile. Tupac no longer viewed the situation as industry rivalry, he saw it as survival. From his perspective, the people he once trusted were now threats. What followed was a shift in Pac's tone, energy, and message. His lyrics became sharper, more direct, and more accusatory. He stopped speaking in metaphors and started naming names. The tension between camps escalated rapidly, fueled by media coverage, radio personalities, and record labels that quietly benefited from the chaos. Diddy, meanwhile, continued to distance himself from the violence. Publicly, he portrayed himself as focused on business and music. Privately, critics argue that his silence spoke volumes. To Tupac, that silence confirmed everything he suspected. Every denial only reinforced Pac's belief that powerful figures could hide behind influence and money. As the months passed, the conflict took on a life of its own. Artists were forced to pick sides. Interviews turned hostile. Diss tracks became weapons. The rivalry was no longer contained within music. It spilled into real-world consequences. Looking back now, many observers see Quad Studios as the point of no return. The night when trust collapsed, paranoia took over, and the industry failed to step in before things spiraled out of control. What started as suspicion evolved into open warfare, and the cost would ultimately be devastating. This wasn't just a feud anymore. It was a chain reaction, one that would eventually claim both Tupac and Biggie's lives.
Biggie Smalls investigation in the early 2000s. The filing reads, the three LAPD and FBI agents were part of a task force to solve the shooting of rapper Notorious B.I.G., also known as Biggie Smalls, legal name Christopher Wallace. The task force, through a sophisticated criminal investigation, obtained sufficient evidence that would prove Mr. Davis was the leader of the Southside Crips and his gang was responsible for over 360 kilos of cocaine and PCP. Mr. Davis provided 3 interviews to obtain immunity from prosecution. The final interview were solely questions regarding the Tupac Shakur shooting, which Mr. Davis was also provided immunity from prosecution. So during a December 2008 interview with investigators, that is when Davis allegedly started to spill the beans about his one-time friend, Sean Combs, who he refers to as Puffy. He claims Sean Puffy Combs solicited Mr. Davis to kill Suge Knight and Tupac Shakur for $1 million. Eric Zip Martin, an associate of Puffy Combs, provided Mr. Davis with a gun to exact revenge on Tupac Shakur for the beating Mr. Anderson received. Now, Davis reportedly told the investigators that even though the job had been partially completed and Shakur was killed, neither he nor Anderson ever got paid. He later revealed that he believes Combs had paid the go-between Zip Martin, who he claims kept the money for himself. And he said much of the same thing in a 2009 interview a year later, because according to the motion to dismiss, the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department, as far back as 2009, was in possession of the same set of facts that the Clark County District Attorney is now alleging makes Mr. Davis responsible for the murder of Tupac Shakur. The Clark County District Attorney's Office has offered no reason as to why it waited another 14 years to prosecute a case against Mr. Davis. Mr. Davis has been irreversibly prejudiced by this unnecessary delay in prosecution of this case.
Hide $1 million, brother. You ain't going to cash that in the check cashing place. You signing that over to somebody. I said 1,000 times, and I'll say it 1,000 times again. Eric Von Zip showed me and my man Boondang, a.k.a. my man Slick, a check for $1 million. We don't know, and everybody trying to say, lying, talking about half of it got paid, 500. I don't know. I know when I asked him about, we asked him, do we ask? No, we didn't ask him. I know when he showed us a check and he walked away after he showed us the check for the $1 million, you understand? I asked Boone, I said, yo, Boone, when did he get a record label? He said, you know how Zip is. I said, when did he get a Zip record label? Zip had a check for $1 million. He said he got it from Barry Hankerson and Jimmy Henchman for his record label, Black Ground Records. So now, if that's true, we know Jimmy Henchman and Puff was cool. you should be able to trace $1 million if that's the truth. If that's the truth, you should be able to trace that, where it came from. Why did he get it? Is that true that he sold a record label to them? And this was all after Pac's death.
As the years passed and the shock of both murders settled into history, one uncomfortable reality never fully disappeared. From the very beginning, Sean Diddy Combs remained a name that many people, both inside and outside law enforcement, could not completely remove from the conversation surrounding Tupac Shakur's shooting. While no criminal conviction ever tied him directly to the crime, suspicion followed him like a shadow, resurfacing whenever new evidence, testimonies, or investigations emerged. Even in the mid-1990s, rumors circulated openly within the hip-hop community. Artists, producers, and street figures spoke quietly, but persistently, about who they believed was responsible. According to multiple journalists and former detectives who later revisited the case, Diddy was discussed as a potential person of interest long before official investigations publicly acknowledged it. This wasn't based on courtroom proof, but on patterns, relationships, and the broader context of the East Coast, West Coast conflict. What fueled those suspicions was not a single piece of evidence, but a convergence of factors. The unresolved Quad Studios shooting, the explosive escalation of the rap feud afterward, and sworn statements that would surface years later from individuals claiming insider knowledge. Investigators examining the case decades later reportedly found themselves circling back to the same questions that had gone unanswered since 1996. Who benefited? Who had motive? And who had the resources to make something like this happen? Importantly, none of this constitutes a legal determination of guilt. Diddy has consistently denied any involvement in Tupac's shooting or death, and he has never been convicted in connection with the case. However, renewed investigative interest suggests that authorities believe certain leads may not have been fully pursued at the time. In recent years, law enforcement agencies have re-examined witness statements, financial connections, and alleged confessions, trying to determine whether early assumptions influenced the direction of the original investigation.
I'm going to give you something that's real true, and I've been wanting to tell you because we've been knowing each other, since we was kids. So Keefy D was like, look, I need the money. Puffy and them supposed to give me $1 million. They gave us most of the money or half of the money. And that's how everything unraveled for is what happened in Vegas. At that time, I'm on parole. I look to the left, look to the right. The whole place is packed. So I'm like, I have to go take a piss. Let's have this conversation in the restroom. He was like, man, I ain't going in that restroom with you. And good thing he didn't, because even though we was friends, but if a motherfucker pays you to kill us, I got a bullet into my skull. And one of the best friends I had ever had in life is Pac. And he ain't here. I'm gonna beat the fuck out that nigga in that restroom. My blood was boiling. Somebody should always say. But at the same time, I am an intelligent, wise man and a businessman. Since I can't do nothing to him, I might as well get him to answer some questions. So I doubled back on him and said, what you mean? He said, well, look, Puffy used to come to the hood.
During an interview with the FBI in 1999, Davis apparently said something completely different. According to the FBI report, which was included in the motion to dismiss, Anderson was not involved in the shooting death of Tupac Shakur, and neither Davis nor his group killed Shakur or Christopher Wallace, aka Notorious B.I.G. Davis does not know who killed the two rap stars. He believes that either individuals from New York associated with Puffy Combs or individuals associated with Death Row Records could have killed Shakur, and that individuals associated with Death Row Records killed Wallace. Okay, So again, changing stories. And by the way, Davis goes on to say that he was introduced to Combs in the early 90s by a man named Eric Zip Martin. This is another alleged drug dealer. And this is where we get into it. So the report reads, in or around 1992, Martin introduced Davis to Sean Puffy Combs. Davis recalls the introduction occurring at the Paradise nightclub on Santa Monica Boulevard. After speaking with Combs, Davis agreed to allow Combs to use his 1964 Chevy in a music video. The video featured the artist Usher. After the vehicle was damaged in the production of the video, Combs paid $2,500 to have it repaired. And by the way, according to Davis, Combs was scared of Suge Knight. And this was a man who had a reputation for being, sometimes violent and extreme. And that moves us now to this DEA report. So there was a DEA report from a 2008 task force meeting with Davis that was also included as an exhibit in the motion. And in it, Davis talks about the murder of a man named Jai Robles. This is Knight's bodyguard. He was killed in Atlanta in 1995. And according to Davis, he'd heard a rumor that an associate of Combs had killed Robles. The report says Combs requested to speak to Davis and asked Davis if he thought it was safe for Combs to come to Los Angeles for a concert. Combs expressed his concerns about Knight and possible retaliation related to the Robles murder. Davis advised Combs that he would provide 40 or 50 tickets to the concert. Davis could provide an entourage. Combs agreed, and Davis and his crew in fact attended the concert in support of Combs. Davis recalls the concert taking place in Anaheim, California. It was at this event that Combs began to solicit Davis to kill Knight and Shakur. Combs asserted something to the effect of, "I'll give anything for those dudes' heads."
As the timeline moves forward, the focus shifts to the months following Tupac Shakur's murder, a period filled with fear, paranoia, and escalating tension. In March 1997, roughly 6 months after Tupac was killed in Las Vegas, Christopher Wallace, known to the world as the Notorious B.I.G., was brought to Los Angeles under circumstances that many later described as deeply troubling. According to multiple accounts from people close to Biggie, he did not want to go to Los Angeles. The city had become symbolic of danger for him. The East Coast, West Coast rivalry was still fresh, emotions were still raw, and Tupac's death had left unresolved anger lingering in the air. Biggie reportedly believed that traveling to Los Angeles so soon after Tupac's murder put his life at serious risk. Despite those fears, Biggie made the trip, largely because of professional obligations tied to Bad Boy Entertainment. Reports suggest that Diddy insisted the promotional trip go forward, framing it as necessary business. Music videos, radio appearances, and industry events were scheduled, and backing out would have been seen as a sign of weakness at a time when reputations were already under attack. Those close to Biggie later recalled that he seemed uneasy from the moment he arrived. Friends described him as tense, guarded, and unusually quiet. He allegedly expressed concerns that something felt off, as if the situation had been set in motion without his full consent. Whether these feelings were intuition, fear, or simply the weight of recent trauma remains a matter of interpretation, but many believe Biggie sensed danger approaching. The atmosphere in Los Angeles during that period was volatile. The feud between Death Row Records and Bad Boy Entertainment had never been formally resolved, and street-level tensions were still high. Even though official statements downplayed the risk, the reality on the ground told a different story. Biggie was a highly visible figure, easily recognizable, and symbolically tied to the very people many blamed for Tupac's death. What makes this moment especially controversial is the question of responsibility. Critics argue that Biggie should never have been placed in that environment so soon after Tupac's killing. Supporters of that view believe the decision to send him to Los Angeles was reckless at best and negligent at worst. Others counter that Biggie was a grown man making professional choices, and that no one could have predicted what would happen next. Still, the unease surrounding that trip has become one of the most heavily scrutinized aspects of the case. Some investigators and commentators believe that Biggie's presence in Los Angeles reignited old hostilities and created the conditions for retaliation. Whether those conditions were exploited by individuals seeking revenge or by actors with more calculated motives is still debated. What remains undeniable is this: Biggie entered Los Angeles with fear on his mind, aware of the risks, yet bound by industry pressure and expectations. Within days, those fears would tragically materialize. This chapter of the story reinforces a recurring theme: how decisions made behind closed doors, often justified as business, can carry life or death consequences in an industry where image, loyalty, and power frequently collide.
Times article in 2008 alleging he'd been involved in your brother's death. What did he say that day when he called you?
He was in town. He was in LA at the time. He was on the radio. He asked a local DJ that we all know, Big Boy, to reach out to me because he wanted to speak to me about something. This is a few years after Pac's murder, and you know, we all were familiar with all the rumors and stuff. I said, yeah, let me talk to him. So he called me, and you know, I had my guys with me, Thug Life guys, and we heard what he had to say. He basically said he ain't have nothing to do with my brother's murder. And I told him the truth is still yet to come out, so we're gonna see. Here we are 27, 28 years later. Looks like there's some doubt in that statement. So, thus, you know, along with all the other suspicions that people have, you know, it was time for it to be investigated.
In a statement at the time, Diddy declared, "This story is a lie," the LA Times story. "Neither I nor the late Notorious had any knowledge of any attack on Tupac before, during, or after it happened." Do you think that was an honest statement?
My opinion is that I don't believe it was a 100% honest statement.
Welcome back to Court TV Live. We are following new developments in the case of the hip-hop mogul who is facing RICO charges in New York, Sean P. Diddy Combs. Court TV has just confirmed that the family of Tupac Shakur is investigating a potential link between the murder of Tupac and Sean Diddy Combs. This coming from attorney Alex Spiro, who represents Tupac's family. Now, this investigation had been previously reported by unnamed sources, but earlier today, Spiro confirmed to our Court TV team that he and a team of investigators has been hired.
Sean Combs allegedly had business dealings with Dwayne Keefe D. Davis, who will go on trial next March for the murder of Tupac. This was back in 1996. Some have speculated that Diddy ordered Tupac's death. That, of course, is just a theory at this point, and we are monitoring the developments in both the Tupac murder trial and the federal indictment of Sean Diddy Combs. So a lot of information to come on that one.
We have an update now on Dwayne Keefe D. Davis. He's charged in the murder of Tupac Shakur. Davis was in court again this morning after a fight with another inmate. Fox 5's Mike Allen walks us through what happened.
Dwayne Davis is answering for a jailhouse brawl. Here's what court records show, along with images from surveillance video released by Las Vegas Justice Court. On December 23rd, Davis was being escorted back into his cell when another inmate, Rockland Hamilton, who's also facing a murder charge, is standing to the right by a sink in this room. Hamilton walked over to Davis and squared up, looking ready to fight. They started throwing punches and grappling, and the officer escorting Davis called for backup, gave verbal commands too for the inmates to stop fighting, and then hit them with pepper spray. Before backup officers arrived, the two inmates kept grappling and throwing punches and were eventually separated after backup officers got into the room. Both Davis and Hamilton face battery by prisoners